Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monte. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to the podcast. Before we get started with this episode, we wanted to make sure that you've heard about the AgEmerge Summer Summit. You're invited to join us August 4th and 5th for a 2-day field event where you'll experience soil health and regenerative agriculture in action on the Bottens family farm in Cambridge, Illinois. In addition to learning from Monte, you'll hear from experts in their field, including Dr. Joel Groover and Megan Filbert, along with some thought-provoking and motivational stories shared by farmer and mentor Cameron Mills and retired mixed martial artist and UFC Hall of Famer Pat Militich. We'll cover a lot of ground, from the basics of cover cropping to the wild side of livestock integration. So come enjoy a chance to think outside the box and get your questions answered as we share years of experience in a full transparency farm tour. Oh, and we won't let you go hungry. All meals during the event are included with registration, and we'll also keep you entertained as you'll have a unique opportunity to spend a fun evening in the pasture with dinner and live music at the 4th annual Concert with the Cows. This is an event you won't want to miss. For more information and to get registered, head on over to our website at www.asn.farm. And now, on to our show. Thanks for joining us. Today we welcome Clint Brauer, CEO and founder of Greenfield Robotics. Clint has a great story. He grew up farming in South Central Kansas and went to K-State where he got into technology. After graduating from college and spending a decade plus in media and technology in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York, Clint decided to return to his roots in Kansas, launching MG Honor Farms on the family farmstead. Clint began adopting regenerative ag principles, but was frustrated with the limitations of current tools and technology for regenerative farming and the dream of organic no-till. So he decided to launch a company where he could use his technology experience to solve the scaling issues of regenerative broadacre systems. Clint and his team are doing some exciting work, and he and Monte explore that today. So let's jump right in.
Welcome to this episode of the AgEmerge podcast. I'm excited to be joined by Clint Brauer with Greenfield Robotics, and he's out of Kansas, where all the ag technology startups are headquartered, right, Clint?
Every single one.
So, Clint, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company, and just start at the beginning and how you got to where you are today.
Yep. Thanks for having me. Much appreciated. I grew up in this area, South Central Kansas, and grew up farming, and got into went to K-State, got into technology, and did that for about 13 years, and out in Los Angeles, mostly San Francisco, New York, and a lot of startups always. And, decided to come back here about, I guess now it's almost 12 years, and decided to do something that I thought was redeemable and figure out what that was. And so set on a trajectory, which most thought was crazy back then, but it's looking less crazy by the year now, was to reduce and then eliminate chemicals out of farming. And so that's sort of how some of this started. And I, of course, started actually growing vegetables and all these types of things, never organic certified, but always use AgEmerge certified inputs. And that one thing led to another, and realized that no-till, being able to do no-till without chemicals, would be probably the biggest impact of all. So that's when Greenfield was born.
So that is amazing. The dream of organic no-till. And it's something I've been pursuing as a farmer. Many other friends and people want to do the same. But the perpetual problem that really requires tillage is that nemesis weed, right? So that's your main focus is getting the weeds out of a no-till production scenario.
Indeed it is. And to make it predictable without tillage.
Excellent. So tell us about how did that time in California kind of shape your thoughts and views, and I assume you had a dairy, a family farm, a dairy, correct? That you
Actually, yeah, we still had dairy when I was little. I used to get milk right out of that, which apparently was high risk, but nobody told me so back then.
I think it's high risk not to. So no, that's if you can handle the real thing, you can handle about anything. So
Yeah.
so it started there, and in LA, then talks about that all the experience with that startup culture and what you were doing there, and how that kind of formed, your thoughts and ability to pursue what you're doing with Greenfield.
Yeah, I think that I went through and helped with a lot of startups, and it's a different culture there, and they're good and they're bad. I think we've cherry picked the good and sort of left the bad behind, but for Greenfield, one of the things that's interesting out there, and I think the culture is shifting everywhere now, but back then, I don't think that you could do what I was doing and what I'm doing now. And if we failed, people would really look down on you. And that's not the case on the West Coast as much in that culture. And so you sort of have the freedom to go out and think creatively and try to bring new things to market. And I think that was probably the best part of it, was sort of being freed up to sort of think creatively and solve problems. And also, I was early in the internet, fairly early, and so early enough that there weren't a lot of experts. So I found myself in positions talking to people I should have never been able to talk to at a young age, that knew a lot more than me, but I happened to understand the internet. And so great experience all the way around. I always felt like I had the experience of a 40-year-old by the time I was, 25. And so it was really great for that, and sort of that culture of moving fast. I think the idea, I think everyone used to just plan everything, right? And in big companies, you still do a lot of this, but the idea of you quickly get to prototypes, you quickly mock things up. And I had a company in 1999. We were one of the first out there to do agile development and weekly scrums and that kind of stuff, and took our project risk almost to zero. And so we do similar things in hardware now, but so there was a lot of positive things, out there.
So that was a great foundation to have, right? To work now in Greenfield, and it really brought you to where you are today. Talk to us a little more about what drives you, the passion side, and why chemistry-free or chemical-free input on organic farming, organic no-till, and these kind of things. Why is that a passion of yours and very personal to you?
Yeah, no, what I didn't mention is really one of the major factors that brought me back 12 years ago, is my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so, I had great parents, and they were always there for me and my sisters. And so I thought, well, I want to be here for them. And so made that decision. And then, I already kind of knew that there are some chemicals that can lead to Parkinson's. I think that much has been proven. And so that sort of shaped some of my thinking. But, I learned a lot from folks about, the value of no-till, and basically thought, well, no-till is a better way to farm. And we got here because of the chemicals. And so if we can remove the chemicals and keep all those positive things, then it's worth doing. And so that sort of, but it was triggered to some extent by my dad having Parkinson's.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to hear that. And it's a silent, epidemic we have in the agriculture community. Is there's a lot of long-term chronic conditions that farmers have and just don't know why. We can assume, but to nail it down is really, really tough. And so it's one thing for not only consumers want to eat clean, but the farmers too are at very high risk of exposure to multiple things. And if we can help do things to de-risk it for the entire farm community, the farmers themselves, operators, but the small communities that surround things, everybody wins, right? So
that's right. And it really, I agree with you, de-risk it. And there's no reason not to attempt to de-risk it, and there's no reason to vilify anyone for anything either, right? So we got here, we got a better way of farming that we can go towards. And so let's see if we can make it even better.
So sometimes that can be a tough conversation, right? Well, why do you want to do that? And what's the problem anyway? I mean, how have you found that, what have been some good ways to have that discussion on why change, right? I've always made a joke, how many farmers does it take to change a light bulb? Or you can insert whatever group you want. How many people does it take to change a light bulb? Well, why change? So how are some of those conversations when you approach people on a new way to farm? What have you found to stimulate that thinking and help drive change?
Yeah, I think in the early days, you're figuring out who's receptive and who's not. And it really, in that way, from my perspective, the technology adoption curve among farmers is no different than the general population. In fact, I would say farmers actually generally adopt faster once they find something they like. So there's that misconception of farmers all being stubborn in that. And I'm like, no more stubborn than a corporate middle manager or executive. I can tell you that.
I agree with you 100%. I think that farmers are often stereotypically seen as, backwards or not willing to change. But no, if you've got something that makes sense and improves the way of life and the stewardship of the soil, farmers are all about it.
And it has to make financial sense, right? And it has to work in their operation. And I think that's one of our advantages here is that I am a farmer. So when we designed how it works, hey, it has to be something I would adopt, right? Starting there, financially it makes sense. It can fit into the operation, and then a lot of research. That said, I mean, look, there's a lot of guys that are not going to adopt this right now. There's folks that have their tillage equipment and maybe they're 5, maybe 10 years from retirement, and they're not going to run out potentially and make those changes. Some will, some won't, and so you don't try to persuade everyone of everything. You find the folks that are like-minded and you work with them. And I found that there's a lot, especially in this region. I can't speak for where you're at, but I certainly can for South Central Kansas.
And I think something for all of our listeners, it's important to know in South Central Kansas, there's probably quite a bit of dryland farming. There's irrigated too, but you're in the zone right there where you're losing an inch of rainfall every 10 to 15 miles you go west. So every drop counts. And when we're in Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, when you're east of the Missouri River, you typically have more rain than what you need in a season to grow the crop. So water is the nemesis. There's tile, and we till the ground to dry it out, common thing that's done in the spring. Well, in Kansas, every drop counts because you can't add more. The weather variability is great and getting greater. And so no-till has been an amazing thing for Western Kansas, and it preserves every drop. So yeah, the more you can enable that, and really, when you say lately in the last 5 years, because of Roundup resistant weeds, Acacia and those kind of things, and wind events that just don't allow us to spray like we used to, the fallow fields are becoming cover crop fields of resistant weeds. And so farmers are going back to sweep cultivators, and tillage methods to kill weeds. And now we're, leaving the soil exposed to wind erosion and evaporating out water. So now we're kind of on a down cycle, right? So I think your timing's impeccable on bringing this product to market.
I hope so. I think so. And I think even where you're at, I think eventually we'll figure out, hey, how can cover crops? My guess is cover crops, we'll find out that they can be active both ways. I know that they kind of started in Minnesota for guys to actually try to pull the water out of the ground. Mm-hmm. But then we found places like this that the transpiration rate sometimes is lower than the evaporation rate when, what's going on. So it's going to be interesting, I think as we move further north and work with farms up there, what we learn,
All right. Well, let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. Tell us about that in the background there on the video. Tell us about this autonomous robot for weed control in no-till. Tell us all about it. How does it work? What iterations you've been through, and those things that you can share, and tell us about the technology and all the bells and whistles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's pretty simple in some ways, but it's more difficult to achieve than even I realized when we started it. But look, in 2016, came up with this concept of there's no resistance to a blade for pigweed, right? But I thought, so I called, my friend who's a crop geneticist. I called a crop consultant, and I said, what happens if you cut a pigweed an inch high or 2 inches high or quarter inch, right? And so we talked about growing points and stuff like that. The answer was no one really knew. And I thought, surely it cannot be this simple. And so 2016 went out there with a knife and rotary mowers and was running around my summer fallow field that had pigweeds all over it. And, just trying to figure out like what works here, what doesn't work, and does this work at all? And figured out that indeed it worked. And, but you repeatedly need to cut that pigweed, right? And so each time you cut it, it comes back weaker, and the lower, the better. And so that was sort of what we came up with. So we started Greenfield in 2018 after kind of doing that a couple summers. And so what they do is post plant, they'll come between your 30-inch rows at this point of soybeans, corn, cotton. It doesn't really matter. And they'll mow. And they're actually now mowing between a quarter and a half an inch high off the ground. So it's comparable to scalping your lawn. And so they zip up and down the rows, and there was a fleet of them. They're a small machine. So we typically deploy what we call a herd of 10 of them and into the alleys, more words we use, the alleys between your crops. And they zip up and down those rows at about 3.5 miles an hour.
Wow.
And they cut those weeds.
Wow.
And
that is fast compared to most robotic equipment.
yeah, we have been running about 4 miles an hour the other day, and running straight as an arrow, 2-centimeter variance, actually. So average variance.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, RTK quality there or better. So yeah, excellent.
Yeah, for it's harder to do on a small machine, but
Well, yeah, when you figure the size of the wheelbase, right, and the terrain of the field can be rough. And okay, so now you've already given me a million questions. I hope that's all right. We're going to have to extend the podcast a couple hours. Don't worry about it. So when you're scalping the soil that low and you're dealing with, agricultural fields, there's significant unevenness, and especially in long-term no-till, you can have holes and all sorts of things. You've overcome some amazing challenges. How do you get it that close? Because yes, that closeness would really affect the broadleaf's ability to recover.
Yep. Yeah. And basically, we've been through a bazillion iterations. One is you have really good equipment and really good components that can take a beating, and so that's number one. You've got to have that set up. And two, you have to be really good at guidance. And our guidance guys, I'll put them against anyone in RTK GPS or, any of sort of technologies we have. So, and it's really about the details, every single detail. But in terms of getting beat up and that, the decks actually are running on air now. The entire system runs on air, and it's got a pretty interesting suspension that will probably go into patent, and this version this year. And so to be able to take that kind of beating, we have all sorts of ways to deal with that at this point. And then the system also can automatically sense if it's something horrendous has happened, and back up, shut it down, start up again, stuff like that. And then we obviously, there's still a level of, we survey each field. And so we understand what's going on in that field before we go out there. And we, of course, talk to the farmer too. And so, we had one field, I remember the second year, and we signed, and he had a really deep draw, and it was like a cliff. And the guy had obviously hung his drill wheel, or maybe the edge of his drill, over that cliff. And if we'd have just done, back when we were doing machine vision, just blindly followed that, we'd have followed it right off the cliff. And so, because we started with machine vision, right, capturing the rows and all that. And so I remember taking Steven out there, who was our head engineer at that point, and saying, look, this type of thing's real, so you got to be careful how we do this. So, but no, it handles it pretty well.
Huh. No, that's amazing to be able to get it that close. And how are you powered? Are you battery powered? Gasoline, diesel?
Yeah, these are battery powered. We carry a lot of battery power on these things, and they're very quickly swappable. About 2 minutes. We pop open the lid. We can swap those out.
It's a herd approach, which is cooler than a swarm approach, right? But I like that. So, you're deploying a herd of 10, and then they rotate out back to home base, I assume, or to the end of the field in order to do battery swap. Do they navigate, like when you have end rows, they just navigate those end rows to a central spot and for the recharge and know when they need recharged, or is that still some manual interaction at this point?
Yeah, so we're monitoring the edge of field still.
Sure.
But with 5G and stuff, I think some of that will go away.
Yeah.
But still, a combination of not wanting to spend the time on 5G yet because we need to be on the edge of field, and making sure these things are, really bulletproof this year still. So end rows, the way it works is we just tell the farmer to either turn your planter off that row next to the end row. So we call it the turn zone. Mm-hmm. So we prefer to have about 50 inches there. So if you're in 30-inch rows, it can work out to pretty close to 50 to 60. And so, don't waste your seed, else we're going to run over or cut it when we turn. And so, but that's about it. That's the way those end rows are handled at that point. So,
makes sense.
And we pull data off the tractor to know where the rows are, and we also fly drones to know where the rows are.
So you're taking the RTK recorded as applied map, essentially, and in addition, georeferencing with a flyover drone to find out what should that path be, and probably create an auto path for each one to go on, or certain zones of them to go to. And
this year it's pretty much pre-padded, before we show up, and that's we're trying to do better of uploading the work up front.
Yes.
Before we arrive at the field,
there's always plenty to do.
You're always getting better. Yeah.
And then what about how are you typically if you're mowing that low? I imagine you're out of the field before you hit canopy, so GPS signal is not an issue, I would assume.
Yeah, so I think that right now, for example, it is a race to canopy. You're exactly right.
Okay.
And so once we get to canopy, if it's something taller than our pole, then we're not going to get signal currently, although I think 5G will remedy that so we can do other activities, which, we'll experiment with later this summer.
We don't want to mention what those activities are, but they could be sensing on the go to get a complete picture of your field as you're going through. I mean, a live stream of your field and then creating automatic recommendation plans, but we don't want to go there. That sounds like too much fun, and that's out of the focus, right?
It might be simpler than that too, but it's pretty good at that already, I think. But yeah.
So in no-till situations, especially if let's say you're after stripper wheat or 200 bushel, 300 bushel corn, there's a lot of residue out there, especially in your environment where maybe it's dry and it don't have the decomposition time. How are you handling that through the machine when you're mowing so close to the ground?
Yeah, it really, a lot of times you are mowing a bit of the mulch in that, and we can adjust how high we're mowing at that point as well. But it basically floats right above it. Now, we used to have a bowl that literally rode on the ground. And of course, if you got in the wrong type of mulch situation, you were pushing a big bunch of mulch along as you were going. But now it's more of a floating mechanism. And we actually this year can adjust that remotely. So we can raise and lower the platform just like your combine does at that point. So we don't have the auto sensing in there yet, I will tell you that, but it's more of an operator keeping an eye on it. But the blades have tremendous power. And so it's the guy that designed our cutting blades has been designing top end lawnmowers for 27 years. So it's cut.
It's a rotary style blade then, I take it, instead of a flail style.
Yeah, it's rotary. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Very good. So you've been through a lot of iterations, right? And since you really started diving in this, you said first looking at it in 2016 and 2018 is when you jumped in full bore. Talk about that iteration process and how much that takes and the challenges associated with that when you're like, oh, nope, we need to go completely different suspension system. You've mentioned that, or mower system or guidance system. And I mean, there's some major things hurdles you've overcome. And what's that like to say, okay, we've invested this much time and money and let's just skip that and go this other way?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, look, there's no playbook for this stuff, although it's being written, right? And so I think that, you just have to be out there and get the reps out in the field and learn what you can. Like I mentioned, we started out in machine vision, and what we figured out was maybe someday we could have gotten it to run the speed that we're running now, but we realized that, there was a better way to do this that was simpler, and we could run at a faster speed and better run at night. And so you spend 2 years building machine vision and you throw it away. I mean, we still have it, but it really doesn't do a lot for us anymore. So not to say we couldn't bring it back for something at some point, but I'm not sure what that application would be at this point. So and then hardware wise, it's very interesting building hardware. And of course, in this era with supply chain, it's even more interesting dealing with some of those issues. And it's like, how many more uphill battles do you want to have? And but we've made it this far. And I think one of the big advantages to this now at this point is our vendors and partners and people we talk to all want to see us succeed. So once they figure out what we're doing, we've actually found that from big suppliers to small suppliers, they find a way to get us what we need when we need it because they're behind what we're doing. And so that is nice. After 12 years of battling uphill, to start having people sort of fight with us is really great.
So I think I know the answer to this, but I want to ask you that, there's a lot of startups in ag automation and robotics. And several of them are focusing on weed control. We've had a few others on the podcast. I'd like you to share, though, what makes you different. And I know what the answer is, but talk a little bit about that. Why are you different than many of these other startups that are out there?
Yeah, so we're focused on enabling regenerative ag to scale. So weed control is where we started, and regenerative, the bedrock of that is no-till. And so we're the only guys focused on that, and all the mechanisms that I come up with and the creations are designed to basically make it easier for a farmer to adopt regenerative and scale, right? And I think there's a scale problem right now.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. Plus, I think your unique focus is not many are focusing on the commodity crops. Most are focusing on the high value, especially in produce crops.
Especially, and there's a lot of people saying a lot of things. But as those are one of the things I was saying that I left behind on the West Coast is just making stuff up. And so, I think that reality is broadacre is considerably different than specialty. And I know because I did some specialty cropping.
So I got a kick out of you posted, Farmer's Edge put a video out about Daisy, the weed killing robot on April 1. It's everybody's making up the April Fool's videos, Dewey's, which isn't too far away from you. I love their bale bed April Fool's jokes. I think they win the one of the year where they got the dynamite in a round bale. I love it. There's nothing better. Mm-hmm. But the Daisy weed killing robot, okay, on the surface, it's interesting. It makes fun of your space, what you're trying to do, right? But on the other hand, I love the one person who's, both characters in there throwing out all these big superfluous words about, it's going to revolutionize how we feed the world. It just is that same old conventional mindset. It just makes you kind of sick. And I think what you just said right there, the regenerative focus starts with no-till.
Yeah.
And, when we work with farmers, we know not everybody can start going from full till to cold turkey no-till. Sometimes there's strip till in between, or minimize the tillage, strip till, no-till. There's a plan depending on your area and your salinity and rainfall, irrigation, blah, blah, blah. But talk to us about why you posted that story. Did I kind of hit it, what you're saying? Not only the obnoxiousness of the robot, but the big words of big industry. Is that what kind of came to mind with you?
That resonated. Farmer Derek did that, and he's actually a customer this year, and I just think that guy's hilarious. And I think that's one thing. Farmers are really able to poke fun at themselves, and they don't take themselves so seriously, and that really makes it wonderful. But you are right. I was listening to all that stuff, and I thought, it's just word salad, it's just word salad, and who cares? It's just perfect, because the reality is, it's never that simple. This is hard to do, and the devil's in the details, and just glossing over things and talking gibberish is absolutely that. And every farmer darn well knows it. And I thought it was hilarious. Because it's completely unexpected using a shotgun to eliminate the weeds. But I thought it was just brilliant.
Very gratifying.
Farmer's Edge and Derek did their kudos to those guys. Just brilliant.
But it's gratifying to use a shotgun to kill weeds. I will say it's not cost effective, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, some of the lines in there were just awesome. Like the spin on stuff was just crazy. So,
used to be part of an angel investing group here in the Quad Cities, and now I'm a part of Ag Startup Engine out in Ames. And
yeah.
I sometimes play, ag startup or technology startup bingo. It's how many of the key words they can insert in a pitch, and you kind of fill out your card. And the more that your card is filled, the more you don't want to invest in that company, because they're talking about all the, we've got this total addressable market, blah 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 blah, and it's like, well, they're really good at pitching, but I don't know how good they are at actually executing. So
yeah, those two things sometimes are opposed.
Yeah. People are great at raising money, typically aren't that good at getting the product to market. So
yeah, blockchain, right? Blockchain.
Oh yeah, it's a blockchain, and we use artificial intelligence and remote. We can. I think I've heard the same pitch from 4 different people. It's like, do you guys just listen to each other or what? So
We're taking a short break to share that the AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by the team at Ag Solutions Network. Rooted in innovation, ASN is committed to leaving the land better than we found it, not simply maintaining it. We're here to help you navigate the balancing act of productivity and building a legacy. From practices to products, ASN is more than a new jug. It's a new way of thinking. So don't be afraid to be different. Be afraid to be the same. Contact Ag Solutions Network today at asn.farm. And now, back to our show.
So what's it like? Here you are, the only one focused on no-till, and one of the few focused on commodity crops, and you're in central Kansas, south central Kansas. You're not in the Kansas City, Olathe area, or at, Manhattan. What's it like being an ag tech startup in Kansas?
It's good and it's bad. I mean, it's the good is I think we've got incredible talent, and we're the only game sort of in this area. And so
you're not competing against Google down the road.
Yeah, there's no Google here, and I think most of our team will never move to Mountain View. So so that's good. We've got incredible talent, and we've got, it's an interesting mix of talent, and the team's larger than what I got behind here, but it's an interesting mix that I'm not sure guys are going to have in Silicon Valley. And that is, not everyone on our team has a college degree, but some of them have been building hot rods since they're about 5 years old. And so when we want to mock something up and do it quick, we actually have 3 guys who know how to weld. 2 of them that can also do all 3 of them can do electrical work. And so there's a infusion of engineering and the math with the common sense and a lot of experience building all kinds of things. And one of our guys helped manage a very big farm for a long time as well. And so it's that is the good part. I'll put our team up against anybody's at this point.
I think you call that, you got the MacGyver X factor going on there.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Especially with the guy at the large farm. I'm sure he cracks out the duct tape and the cable ties and, band wire and all sorts of great stuff to make robotics work, right?
Seriously. I mean, we had something the other day, we recognized a problem in the new model, and I said, hey, what do you want to do? And the next day it was solved.
That's awesome.
Right? We'll put it in the CAD later and make that change later, but it's really cool. So that I think, and that makes it a fun team too. We have a good time, a lot of different kind of viewpoints on things. So I think the negative is this: the coasts don't understand broadacre ag. The coasts they're starting to spin up on regenerative, but they're getting lost in all the keywords. And so funding wise, they're getting lost. They don't really understand what they're funding and what they're not funding, and just barely can grasp what we actually do out here. And so that, and from a fundraising perspective, has made it very painful, right. Especially early on. And I was fortunate enough to have early on a lot of people that knew me and worked with or worked for me that were angel investors that kept us going in the early stages. And then the network grew. So I think that's the biggest downside was fundraising. Of course, it's going smoother now, but it wasn't. It was brutal at the beginning, because when you just got a deck and some results from cutting weeds.
Yeah. Access to capital is probably the number one thing between the coasts. That's the problem. But like you said, the talent's there. They want to stay home. They want to stay local. They understand the problem. That's all good parts of the formula. It's just that early seed capital is tough. We're more conservative with our capital deployment in the quads, or not the quad cities, but I mean in the entire Midwest, because it's we're just not as we're spend thrifty, right? It's the farming culture. So
well, and you don't have all the big exits that people have had, and that sort of money floating around from those exits that they angel investors, as far as I'm concerned, are the only venture capital, right? I think everybody else is growth capital. Angels are the ones taking the risk when you don't even have an MVP, or you have an MVP. It's after that sort of growth capital, right? I've got something, I've proven it, I've got the money, or I've got the customers. Now it's growth capital, and the only risk is, can you outgrow your competitor, right? And so angels really, I mean, their name is perfect, right? I think without angels, the innovation out there would die.
That's a good point. And I think farmers that are interested in helping these technologies get to market, or help something that is that can be beneficial for their farm, really should consider getting a little more in tune with what those things look like, and how to invest, how to see if there's an opportunity that makes sense, and be that angel, like you said, to make these products a possibility. So more for what it can do for them in their industry than, worried about, am I going to get a 500% return on money, I think is
right.
Look at, because this isn't software, right? It's not 98% margin stuff. Your business model is probably going to be a weeding as a service model, would be my guess. I don't, you're going to own the units, and you're going to come in and charge a person that, hey, we're going to manage all your weeds for $100 a year, and you can be certified organic. And people are, oh, great, problem solved. Is that what your model is going forward?
Not far off. Yeah, it is robotics as a service. Yep. And the next robot gets rid of all the weed, needs for the herbicide. So, so yes, and it is a per acre fee. So that's the way it's set up,
Yeah. And I mean, it's a great solution to this problem. So what this, we kind of had an idea of the area of focus for today. What are you looking at for the future in there, Clint?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's one is obviously we need to expand what we have, and the other is to get this next gen kind of robot. We built multiple single row versions. Our third version's been testing out in field since early March, and so we want to build a multi-row version, hopefully for later this year. How much later yet to be determined, but in that one is something that starts pre-plant and deals with herbicide, deals with basically you don't need to do a burn down anymore. And so depending on the situation on your field. And so that really is the next big one is, being able to say, okay, now you can go herbicide free without, deep tillage. Or tillage at all. So that's really what the next couple of years are all about, is getting those two things going that are complementary. And so farmers have that option.
Yeah. Excellent. And then, do you see where they'll all be individual units, or do you see you'll have like a pack leader type of arrangement? Like let's say you got one that's got all the brains, and it's peer-to-peer networking with, 7 others to do an 8-row pass. Where does that economics on something like that come together? Is it just cheaper to have each one able to do anything? Probably.
Yeah, I mean, every row can be a little different, especially your cheat rows. And so it's almost as easy to just let each robot sort of monitor what's going on there. We can actually, we do have that software. We can tie them all together if we want to run through the field and sort of working together. I don't think we ever did the final math on, making adjustments between them all, but for a cheat row or something like that. But right now they're pretty much all independent units. Being sort of run by a master brain, I guess we could call it at this point. So they're making their own decisions on a minute by minute, but where am I going on the field next and all that is made by sort of a master system at this stage of the game. Well, so that's probably more technical detail than you wanted or needed.
No, that makes sense. And I think ultimately you have to get one of those awesome photos lined up with a drone, how they do all the combines in a row through the field, or all the cotton pickers in a V shape or something. You need to have your robots all lined up the same way, doing the same
Oh, well, we will be.
That's good.
We're actually cutting deals with, yeah. So you'll see that we're actually have some partners this year that we're weeding for some of their ingredients, and so you'll see that in some of the marketing this summer. So,
Uh, what are some of the possibilities you're amazed by in what you're doing in the future?
well, I think the thing that sort of surprised me the most was the more I dig into this, when we get no-till and if we can get cover crops going on it is, I think there's a bigger and bigger growing kind of concern, if not almost borderline panic about climate change and carbon. And regenerative ag actually, I believe, can be a solution, if not the solution, a huge one for this, if we can facilitate farmers getting into cover crops and de-risking that for them. And then I think after that, once you have the cover crops on my farm, we graze those cover crops. How can we make that it's not so labor intensive and insane where you're me in the middle of the night and the sheriff is calling you to tell you the sheep are just outside of town. So I think that, being able to take kind of what Gabe Brown's done and of course many others now and make that really work and scale to keep that carbon in the ground, that excites me. I mean, I think that's a huge change. It's not just getting the chemicals out, but the carbon and that, I think farmers want to do all these things. It's just, man, how do you do it? Without incurring huge risk and not waking up in the middle of the night, right? So, I mean, we're all farming way different than we grew up farming, right? And no one's using a plow behind a horse, right? But to adopt those things, it needs to be de-risked. And so it's predictable. Right now, commodity prices are good. You can take on a little more risk. But when I started this company, commodity prices were horrible. And so taking on risk was not great, right?
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. And I love your go-to-market approach, basically weeding as a service and or robotics as a service. And I think that's a great way to de-risk it. But it's also a great way to improve return on assets. That's farmers are constantly plagued by, $2 million of equipment or 3 or 4 or 5 sitting in a shed and being utilized for maybe 3 months in a year, maybe, closer to 1 or 2 in most regions of the United States. Now, California, again, different. They can use them 8 to 12 months out of the year. But, right. Most of the areas the return on assets is terrible. So, having a swarm approach where you could go north to south like the wheat run, it's just we're on the weed run instead. So,
yeah. And I think this kind of stuff like we're doing and the things we're bringing Monte will be huge. At some point, farmers will be able to get more creative again, too. Right. And so when you start uncorking that ability, then, they can kind of discover markets and new ways of doing things themselves, And I would love to be able to tap that. We've always talked about being able, by the way, tap the ingenuity of farmers, but I went ahead and got a couple of guys that were farmers, helping us. But because farmers are pretty, well, if you look around the equipment companies around here, most of them were started by farmers.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So not to be a devil's advocate here, but how do you control the grasses with a mowing approach?
No, it's a great question. So we tell farmers, hey, post-plant, we're going to mow these things and we're going to mow the grass too really low. But if you have a really bad crabgrass infestation, for example, you may need to still come in with the low cost, well, not as low cost right now, but glyphosate or something like that to knock out those grasses if they're getting too much of a foothold, because mowing them low, yeah, it slows it down, but it doesn't completely stop them. And so that's something we just tell them up front. Right now, this current mechanism does not deal with grasses. The next one does.
That's what I like to hear.
Yeah. Because I'm not going to do a half solution, right?
Right. For the organic solution, that'll need to. You still are solving a great problem with most of the Roundup resistance is in broadleaves. So, which you're taking out a huge problem there. But to get to the full regenerative chemistry-free inputs, you'll need that. So I'm glad to hear you're working on that.
Yeah, that's been in works, like I said, about 3 years. So I think we know how to do it. Now it's building the machines and proving it, to everybody else.
So what's it going to look like 5 years from now?
I don't, it's kind of like when you do your spreadsheets for investors, your first caution is it's our best guess, right? What's coming 5 years from now?
Next week is the best guess, let alone 5 years. But not only
Yeah.
you, but what do you think maybe you can take it a step back industry wise? What
that's
would it look like, you think, in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think that it's going to change all through the supply chain. I mean, I have my own little supply chain we built for a pet food company. And I think based on what we're doing in other robotics companies, consumer expectations are going to rise of what is possible. And so I think you're going to see over time more and more clear delineation of the output. The commodity model is always going to be around, but I think the opportunities for actual broadacre to become a little more specialty providing is a big one. And I know we're pretty focused on that as well. And so that's pretty vague. But my point is, the minute you can do something you couldn't do before, and it's something consumers want, then you should get paid for that, whether you're the farmer or whoever. And so, or the food brand or Greenfield. And so I think that there's a huge opportunity there for all of us to participate. And I think those are the things that will actually have a better return to the farmer's bottom line. I think the carbon markets hopefully will settle down at some point here. And I'm really hoping that people realize probably the cheapest and most effective way to sequester carbon is planting seed, right? And incentivizing farmers to do that. And so I'm really hoping that will come through legislation and just incentives on these carbon markets so that farmers go, okay, I'm willing to take some more risks and do some things different because I'm economically incentivized to do it. And hopefully we see all that in 5 years. We'll see,
Yeah, I think you're onto something. As regenerative has been the number one food term and has grown at a huge rate, putting the definition to that or making sure that people are hitting their claims is important. And I think that you offer a verification step as a part of that. That's pretty easy to identify. And you definitely offer a tool that enables it. So I'm pretty excited about it. And when you break out of Kansas and you get a little closer and are willing to cross the river into Illinois, I'd certainly be interested in working with you and experimenting with on our own farm. I think it'd be a great opportunity. And I think several of our customers in Kansas and such would be interested in working with you, longtime no-tillers. So we certainly can get you connected there. Anything else I should have asked or brought up today while we were together?
No, I just, I don't know. We need to pray. And it's the old farming thing down here on our dryland acres. We need to pray for rain. So it's, tell you, it's getting a little dicey.
Yeah. That's, we have to pray for rain, but we need to be prepared when we don't get it. So,
right.
Enabling long-term no-till like you're doing is definitely a way we can be prepared for it. So,
yeah, definitely.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Clint, and thank you for all the work that you and your team are doing. Breaking open into a new area. It's tough to be the first person, and I'm glad to see that you guys are doing it and approaching it in a unique way. So congratulations.
Thanks for having me and letting me, talk about what we're doing. It's much appreciated. And, it's tough, the technology in that, but the further we've gotten, the support from farmers and co-ops and organizations has been fantastic, to be honest. And it does feel good when you're, out in the field and someone stops their car and they come out and they tell you they're happy you're doing what you're doing. That just means a lot. Or the emails we get sometimes and it means a lot because, Monte, you're right. This is very hard. This has been 12 years of the hardest thing I've ever done. And so when people drop you a nice line or say something to you and they say, we're rooting for you, that does mean a lot. So, and then being able to come on a show like yours and talk about this is just super helpful.
Well, thank you. And I hope that some of our listeners will take a cue here from this. Drop him an email, touch base, encourage him, cheer him on. That would be great. And participate. Stay tuned because there's going to be lots of things to come in the future, I'm sure. So thank you, Clint, you and the entire Greenfield Robotics team, and for what you're doing. And we're going to follow you closely in the future. So keep up the great work.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this conversation today. You know, ingenuity and innovation have always been at the core of agriculture, and there's no question that Clint and his team are on a mission to provide innovative tools to meet the challenges of today's regenerative ag systems. And to learn more about what we're doing to help growers implement soil health practices, check out our website at asn.farm, and there you can click on the links to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. There's a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.